In the spring of 1979, a researcher named Joe Smith set a trap in the snow along the North Fork of the Flathead River in northwestern Montana. He was not expecting to catch anything. Wolves had been gone from Montana for nearly 50 years. What he pulled out of that trap was an 80-pound female gray wolf. What happened to those mountains over the next 15 years should have been impossible. Nobody standing in that snow that morning could have explained it. When that wolf crossed into the North Fork Valley in 1979, this is what she found. Bare riverbanks, no willows, no aspens, no beavers. A mountain range that had been falling apart for 50 years without anyone noticing. This is what removing one animal from a landscape does over time. And this is what two wolves were about to walk back into. What killed those mountains did not happen overnight, and it did not happen by accident. For thousands of years, wolves were at the top of everything in Montana. They hunted the elk. The elk kept moving because of it, and because the elk kept moving, the land stayed healthy. Then the killing started. In the early 1900s, the federal government paid bounties for dead wolves. Ranchers poisoned carcasses with strychnine and left them out in the open. Government hunters worked the mountains until there was nothing left to find. By 1936, the gray wolf was gone from Montana, every last one of them. With the wolves gone, the elk stopped moving. They found the best spots along the riverbanks and stayed there. They ate the willows down to the roots. They ate the young aspens before they could grow. Without those trees, the riverbanks fell apart. The shade over the water disappeared. The rivers got warmer. The beavers had nothing to build with and left. Everything that depended on cold, clean water started to disappear too. Nobody called it a crisis. It just looked like the normal Montana landscape, but it wasn't. It was a landscape that had lost the one animal holding it all together. Bob Ream noticed. A wildlife professor at the University of Montana, Ream had been hearing reports of wolf sightings along the Canadian border since the early 1970s. Most turned out to be dogs or coyotes, but enough were real that in 1973 he started the Wolf Ecology Project, a small team set up to find out if any wolves were actually moving back into Montana on their own. 6 years of searching turned up tracks, occasional sightings, and nothing else. Until Joe Smith's trap snapped shut in the spring of 1979. The wolf in the trap was a female. The biologist named her Kishinena after a creek in British Columbia just across the border. She weighed 80 pounds, was healthy, and had a radio collar put on before she was released back into the mountains. She roamed up to 30 miles on each side of the border and was probably running with a few other wolves when she first crossed into the United States. A young biologist named Diane Boyd had just joined the Wolf Ecology Project to track her. Boyd moved into a one-room cabin in the North Fork with no running water, no electricity, and no way to reach the outside world. She tracked Kishinena on foot through the snow, by snowmobile in winter, and by plane when the mountains made everything else impossible. For nearly 2 decades, the story of wolves coming back to Montana was really the story of Diane Boyd following one wolf through the wilderness. Around 1981, something happened that nobody expected so soon. Kishinena crossed paths with a male wolf that had also come down from Canada. He had 3 toes on one foot, probably caught in a trap at some point. They mated. Kishinena had 7 pups. Not long after, the male was caught in a snare and killed. She raised all 7 pups by herself. What Boyd was watching from a distance, without knowing it yet, was the beginning of the magic pack. By 1986, Kishinena's pups and their offspring had moved south into Glacier National Park. It was the first time in half a century that wolves had denned inside Glacier. The pack grew to 12 animals in 5 years, and then it kept growing. If you're finding this story interesting, hit subscribe. We cover exactly this kind of wildlife comeback every single week. Now back to the mountains. What the Magic Pack did to the North Fork over the next decade is the part of this story that almost nobody has heard. The story that got all the headlines, the Yellowstone wolf reintroduction in 1995, took all the attention away from what had already been happening in Montana for 15 years before the first Yellowstone wolf was ever released. When wolves came back to the North Fork, the elk felt it right away, not because the wolves killed huge numbers of elk. They did not. What changed was how the elk behaved. Elk that had been sitting on the riverbanks all day, eating every willow and aspen in sight, stopped doing that. They moved. They stayed away from the spots where wolves could cut them off, the open riverbanks, the narrow meadow edges, the places with no way out. And in the spots the elk stopped eating, the willows grew back, the aspens grew back, the trees along the riverbanks got taller, the roots held the banks together again, the shade came back over the water, the rivers got colder. Beavers came back to parts of the North Fork where they had not been seen in years. Their dams slowed the water down and created wet meadows that had been dry for decades. Songbirds moved into the willows. The insects came back over the water. None of this was planned. None of it was managed. Two wolves crossed a border, found each other, and built a pack. The pack changed how the elk used the land, and the land came back. By 1996, just 15 years after Kishinena and her three-toed mate had their first litter, there were 70 wolves in northwestern Montana across 7 packs. The wolf population of Montana, which was 2 animals in 1979, had reached 316 by 2006. All of it from natural recovery. No trucks, no release crates, no government reintroduction program. Just 2 wolves that walked down from Canada and found a mountain range that was waiting for them. This is where the story turns. In 2021, the Montana state government passed a set of new laws aimed directly at wolves. Night hunting was allowed, baiting was allowed, neck snaring was allowed. Hunters and trappers could now kill far more wolves in a single season than ever before. The goal was to bring the wolf population down. In 2025, the state set a kill quota of 452 wolves in a single season. That is nearly half of Montana's entire wolf population. Conservation groups went to court to stop it. A judge let the quota stand. The full legal case goes to trial in 2027. Diane Boyd, who spent 40 years in that North Fork cabin watching wolves come back from nothing, put it simply. Wolves are very resilient, she said. If they aren't shot or poisoned, they do pretty well. That sentence works in both directions. What started with one wolf in a trap in 1979 became one of the most watched wildlife recoveries in American history. It showed something that scientists had long believed but never seen proven at this scale, that when you put the top predator back, the land starts fixing itself. 2 wolves, 1 dead mountain range, 15 years, 70 wolves across 7 packs. Willows and aspens growing back along rivers that had been stripped bare for decades. Beavers. In places they had not been seen in living memory, the mountain range remembered what it was supposed to be. The wolves just reminded it. Whether Montana lets them keep doing that is a question that courts and lawmakers are still fighting over right now. Hit subscribe, because the next video answers one question. What can 153 otters do to a dead river in 30 years? The answer is something you won't believe.